Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Hal Bowling. Hal is the co-CEO of Launch Chattanooga. Launch is an entrepreneur support organization that began in 2011 with a unique focus to serve underrepresented entrepreneurs. He is on a mission to grow Chattanooga's entrepreneur community one business at a time. Hal, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before you tell me your favorite food truck in Chattanooga, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
I started drinking decaf maybe 10 years ago. So for me, it's a decaf espresso with maybe a splash of cream for the morning, and try to drink as much water as I can as well. So it's kind of a split between those two.
Well, we're kindred spirits. I'm a decaf guy.
Are you?
Yeah, I had to give it up probably 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, it just did bad things, just the jitters and all the negative stuff that comes with it. But
yeah.
Enjoy coffee though.
And I think coffee shops are getting better than about having decaf available. I really don't like going places to go, well, we don't have decaf, but we can make you a decaf Americano. That's a shot of espresso with hot water in it. Come on.
The worst are the coffee snobs who really don't think decaf is real coffee, and really kind of look down on people that drink it, and that kind of thing. I don't know if you run into that, but I've had quite a few of those.
Can you taste the difference?
No,
I can't taste the difference to save my life.
No, me neither.
And it does everything I want it to do. The flavor, the aroma, everything is the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Launch, I think, is a critical organization in Chattanooga, but obviously you didn't start there, and we're going to talk a lot about Launch and what you're doing with that now. But I want to start where I always started. It was in the beginning. So you grew up in Asheville. Yes,
Asheville, North Carolina is my hometown. Grew up there and got to Chattanooga by way of Covenant College.
Yeah.
Came there in the 80s and went to school there, and my wife and I met there. So it really changed my life in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah. So you grew up in Asheville, high school in Asheville.
Yep.
Found out about Covenant. What was it when you were leaving Asheville as a college freshman to be? What was it you wanted to be?
I wasn't sure at that point. I was interested in learning more about the Bible and exploring more on the spiritual and theological side of things. I just had grown more hungry for that in high school, which might be a little unusual for a high school student. But
it's a pretty young age to get that deep.
Yeah, but that was where I was, and I actually started at UNC Asheville and then transferred to Covenant. So, and I didn't really know much about Covenant College, to be honest. I knew that it was a good place. I went to visit and thought, this is seeing people there that were normal people, and a lot of folks that looked like they were enjoying their college life. And so ended up making the decision to go there.
Yeah, I've never been on the campus, but I could imagine at the top of the mountain, it's a pretty cool campus. Huh?
It's beautiful when it's not fogged in, but it's fogged in quite often with whether it's actually clouds, not fog, but it happens a lot.
Yeah, I bet it does. So you get up to Covenant, and you're not sure what you're going to do. What'd you focus on?
I focused on business and missions and biblical studies, and those are a major in business. Missions and biblical studies was a minor. So
that's an unusual combination.
Yeah, it was, but it was sort of what I was interested in, and so the blend of the two was interesting. And I think that's sort of been a theme throughout my life is, and I've done both. I've really spent time in sort of nonprofit and ministry-oriented things, and also spent time in business.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you met your wife at Covenant.
Yes, we met at Covenant, and so that was. I've had conversations with my kids about how things could have been a whole lot different. If with a couple of little twists and turns or different decisions, and it's crazy to think about that kind of thing.
It's funny how life works out. So both you're at Covenant and you get out of school. What keeps you in Chattanooga, or did you stay in Chattanooga?
We did. We stayed in Chattanooga just for a bit before we moved away for about 5 years and then returned to Chattanooga. We both really liked Chattanooga, but I worked in sales right out of college, and my wife Suzanne is a teacher and had an education degree, and so we both worked after college and got married after college, and then we were here for just maybe a year or something like that before we moved to Australia and worked with college students in Australia.
Oh, wow. I never knew that portion of the story.
Yeah, it was not a long-term deal. It was about 2 years that we were there, and
what an adventure.
Great experience. Yeah.
So when you got out of college, what was that first job?
First job was selling personal computers that had just sort of come into their own to Fortune 500 companies. I worked for a company that sold IBM, Compaq, and Hewlett-Packard computers to Fortune 500 companies.
So you're doing that in the Chattanooga area, right, when you got out of school?
Yes, and in the region, really.
Yeah.
But, that was back in the day when, these things cost a lot of money. They were, $20,000 a piece. They were pretty large. They weren't all that fast, but they were just coming into their own. And so, like TVA, they were someone that I worked with, as well as what's now SunTrust, American National Bank, others that were larger companies, some in Atlanta, some in Nashville. But when they made a purchase, they were, it was a large purchase because they were buying hundreds at a time of these really expensive machines. So,
and this was when computers were just becoming part of the desktop in the workforce. Everyone was getting their own personal computer.
That's right. Everybody was getting their own personal computer.
What a great gig.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was my first job out of college. It was a lot of fun.
I bet you learned a lot on that.
I did learn a lot.
So you do that for how many years?
Did that for a couple of years, and then my wife and I had just been talking more about and kind of feeling a nudge to do something at that time that was, that would serve, but also, maybe have a bit of an adventure outside of the U.S. And so we started exploring that, looking into that, and there was an organization, the denomination that we were part of and that Covenant's affiliated with is the Presbyterian Church in America. We were working with them, and they had some options. So we talked to them about possibilities, and they narrowed it down for us to a few, and they really basically chose for us. So we didn't have a whole lot to do with it, but we ended up going to Australia. We went through some training before we went, and lived in California for a few months for that training, cross-cultural training, and then worked in Australia.
And what did y'all do in Australia?
We lived in Brisbane, which is on the kind of northeast coast. If you're orienting it Australia to the U.S., it's sort of about where New York is, except everything's flip-flop because they're below the equator. So it's summer there when it's winter here, and the opposite, winter there when it's summer here. It was not too far from the coast, and it was a pretty warm climate. But we worked with college students at the University of Queensland, Queensland University, and we're involved in sort of helping them figure out their faith and life and futures and that kind of thing.
So kind of like counselors?
Yeah, something like that. There was a church locally that we were connected with that was, we were connecting students. A lot of the students went there, and so we were involved with them through the church.
Where did this sense of service come from? Was that something you were raised with, or really took hold when you were at Covenant? Or, did you just grow up always having that?
I did. I think both Suzanne and I did from our own families and our own communities. But we were also, I think, in a place where we had some experiences doing short-term things. Like in college, I was able to go to Korea and live there for a summer, taught English to Koreans that were there. And so, just having some experiences. She had several in high school that she worked with her youth ministry at her church, and they led several trips abroad, and she traveled with students to those some places in South America. But I think both of those had, for us was a real draw to kind of see more, explore a little more about what it could look like for us to serve abroad.
Looking back on that, how important was that in forming who you are today?
It was very important. I think, and I've all of our children have also had experiences overseas, and we worked hard to try to make sure that they do, because I think it just broadens your horizon so much, when you find other cultures and other places that, you just see a world that's a lot bigger than your own.
Mm-hmm.
And it keeps you, I think, grounded a little more and helps you. For me, my personality is not so much black and white as a lot of shades of gray. And so I think that can be a good thing. It can be a healthy thing, because you see, especially in cultures, that there's so many different ways that people live and interact, and things that they value and that are important to them. And it really challenges your own beliefs.
Yeah, I think that's an important point you make, particularly in the times we're living in right now, where everything is so black and white. You're either right or you're wrong. And I think over the years, I've become much more of a shades of gray person, because there are nuances.
Yeah, right. Not that there aren't absolutes and that there's not truth, but I think it's just really important to be able to value other perspectives on life, and to be able to, whether it's people we live with here or whether we, people all around the world, but for sure, travel and living abroad really fostered that in me.
So you're in Australia for 2 years. What'd you like most about it?
Well, Suzanne and I were newly married. It was a great experience, I think, for us, just to sort of build a foundation for our relationship and our marriage, and just adjust to a lot of things that were hard, being away from family. We missed important events in people's lives, weddings and, things like that we just couldn't travel and be there for. So, but we really bonded, I think, through that experience. And we made some great friends. Australians are great people, and we loved the folks that we met and built relationships with there.
So when you were down there, you weren't able to come back for the 2 years at all. It was just pretty much we're there.
Yep, that's right.
And you guys are newly married. You met in college, so you're still getting to know each other.
We're still getting to know each other. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And the other thing about Australia is a lot like America, 60 years ago, but everything closed at the end of the day at 5 o'clock. Most things closed. There are not 24-hour Walmarts and stores that stay open until midnight, and things like that. And so the whole culture is just very, it's a lot quieter. It's a lot slower paced. And so that was a big adjustment. And I think something that was good for both of us, just to figure out how not to come out of our skin when there weren't necessarily things to do after, 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
What a great age to do that, though.
It was.
So after 2 years, what do you do?
Well, so at that point, there was an opportunity to come back and work at a church in South Florida, which is where Suzanne was from. Knew we'd be around family. So, and that was a part of the role at the church was a missions role. And so it was a large church, about 5,000 members. And so I was able to work there and do a lot of, variety of things, but the missions part was sort of the focus.
So you're working with the church, you're in missions. How long are you down there?
We were there for, I think, 4 years, and we really loved it. We had 2 of our 3 kids there, and loved being with family, near family, and loved the things that we got to do. I got to travel more internationally and work with a lot of different organizations that were doing great work around the world, addressing all kinds of needs, things around poverty and some of that. And so, that was a pretty unique and pretty cool experience for someone as young as I was.
Were you in your 30s?
Not even that, in my 20s.
And you're traveling internationally. Where were some of the places you were going?
Yeah, it was Russia, just after things opened up in the Soviet Union.
Oh, that had to be a neat
which
time.
Was, pretty interesting time to be there. And then some areas in Latin America, South America, Guatemala. Haiti was a place that our church, had sort of adopted. We spent a lot of time traveling. I spent a lot of time traveling to Haiti, probably did 10 trips there or something like that. Both doing work with churches that were there and a lot around aid and poverty alleviation there. And then also bringing folks from our church there.
And I've known you a couple of years now, and this is really not part of the story I didn't know a lot about. I didn't realize how mission-driven and service-driven you were, and you're doing that for a couple of years in Fort Lauderdale. Is that when you come back to Chattanooga, or how did you get back?
Well, we started really missing Chattanooga because it's such a special place. And so that all happened while we were there. South Florida is great, but it just, it leaves some things to be desired in terms of there's a lot of concrete. There's a lot of, if you're not living on the beach, we were a few miles from the water, and just getting ourselves and our kids and their chairs and pack and plays and, sand buckets and everything to the beach was like, a ton of work.
That's an outing.
It's a big outing. So we, we didn't go a lot because of that. And so, those are things you don't realize all the time. But also, I think that the experience we had at the church there was a great one. And again, another really unique experience to be part of a church that became one of the largest churches in the country, but kind of realizing that's not really for me. And it had gotten to the point where I was I felt very shallow with so many people. I felt like I had the opportunity to sort of speak to thousands of people all week long, but then that was it. And it was sort of like start the week over again and speak to thousands of people, again. And so I really was, I think, looking for a little more smaller numbers, deeper kind of relationships was sort of more how I appeared. Yeah, able to connect a little more. And so there was an opportunity to start I guess franchise might be the right word, of a organization that was in Nashville called Christian Leadership Concepts. And it was basically a leadership development sort of organization for business folks. And so that was what brought us back to Chattanooga, and came here to start that in 1994.
So you were, in a great sense, looking for a way to get back.
Yes.
You found out about Christian leadership. And maybe this is the wrong analogy to give, but similar to maybe a BNI with Christian leadership?
Something like that. Yeah, I think this deal was a 2-year, pretty heavy commitment for a group of, mostly businessmen that would meet together really early in the morning, go through some books together, sort of learn about each other's lives and about, the things that mattered, and really try to support each other through that, and make connections to the community and some of the ways that, people could get involved. A variety of different churches and backgrounds, denominational backgrounds represented. And so it was a good experience.
Does that still exist here in Chattanooga?
I don't think it does today. I mean, there were some folks on Signal Mountain that were doing it last I heard, and I can't remember if I'm not 100% sure if it's still going today or not.
And I was just curious because it seems like that, particularly at that stage in a person's career, they tend to keep to themselves. Put your head down, get your work done, and you don't have someone to talk to about those common type issues.
Yeah, and I think that was a lot of the impact of it was exactly what you're talking about, where, sort of early in your career, you could establish some patterns that could hopefully set you on a course, to be healthier as you did business. Because
balance is really important, particularly right. You're starting your career, you got a young family, and it's all about I got to provide.
Definitely so. Yeah, but I think that we started out talking about my major in college being business and minoring in missions and biblical studies. That theme and sort of the integration of work and faith have always been important to me, and we really explored that with these groups that we were leading a lot. We read some great books, and we're able to focus on that quite a bit. So it keeps the conversation from being something where someone is kind of this Sunday morning church goer, and more the kind of thing where it's like, okay, well, if your faith is important to you, then it probably matters not just on Sunday morning, but really 7 days a week. And so how can you do that in your family life? How can you, bring that to bear in your business life? What does that really mean, for you to have, be a person of faith and to live that out week to week?
Teaching or discussing how to live it rather than just go through the mandatory motions of, hey, it's Sunday, it's 10 o'clock. I got to go to church.
That's right. Yeah.
How long did you do that?
About 4 years. You may be picking up on a pattern. It's about 4 years. So about 4 years. And then thanks to someone in our community who offered to get some sort of industrial psychological help for me, to think about my future and what I really, was passionate about and interested in doing. I moved from there into starting a business, and that was a mall advertising business with several partners. And so I really felt like, business is something that I loved and that was important in our community and something that I wanted to pursue with my life. More so, I think, than the maybe full-time vocational ministry work that I had done previous to that.
And so you became an entrepreneur.
I did, yeah, in 1997. And so that was interesting because in Chattanooga at that time, there really wasn't, CoLab didn't exist, Launch didn't exist. There was nothing that was necessary. I shouldn't say nothing. The business development center where we are right now, it was here. And so there were some pieces like that, that were here. Obviously the chamber was here. And there were some things, but just not nearly as much as there is now for entrepreneurs.
And we're probably at the height right now. And I'm sure we got greater heights to go, but the greatest height we've been in this community in terms of entrepreneurship and the resources available and the number of organizations and just the culture in general.
Right, yeah.
So what did that look like for you? You're young, probably in your 30s at this point, starting a business. You got 3 kids at that time? Or?
Yep. We had our third in 1998, so we were right in there.
Yeah. So pressure?
Yeah, that was quite a bit of pressure to, get going, grow the business, timelines. I had a timeline, I had goals. Yeah. Nothing that I set out to accomplish happened on the schedule that I set out to accomplish it on.
Yeah. Does it ever?
So yeah, does it ever? So it was, that was hard, but just some of the realities of that and the ripple effects of that, make it difficult. So as we grew, I had several partners that were had brought in business with me. One of them was in the business in England, in the UK, and knew it real well. And we were trying to sort of work out the comparisons of there versus here, and it was just a completely different animal here than there. A lot of it was, and our first contract really was with CBL. They allowed us to put advertising displays in the mall, and it was really the thought behind the business was, can we use the mall as a advertising medium? I mean,
as a captured audience.
Yes,
yeah.
And at the time, Hamilton Place Mall, which was newer at that time, and malls were in their heyday.
It was the largest mall in Tennessee at that time.
It was definitely one of them, and it saw about 20 million visitors a year coming through. So, when you think about that and the impressions that you have there versus other types of media that you could get, it really was a good medium. And
what were you selling inside the mall? Were they video displays? Were they static?
They were static for the most part. We moved more into some video displays, but this was keeping our overheads low. Video displays were much more expensive to put in. We had to bear the cost of putting those in, installing them, but basically we would share the revenue with the mall owner. And so they gave us a handful of their, I would say maybe not their top tier malls to begin with. And it was sort of, I think, an opportunity to test us and see how we do. Yeah. So we were operating in markets like, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and
not top tier,
not top tier markets, and so even Chattanooga was later in the game. That wasn't one of the ones they initially gave us, and so we worked these malls and we're trying to figure out. So we were basically trying to figure out how to compare what my business partner was doing in London versus what we were doing in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And you can imagine the differences there, but the way you sell an ad was very, very different. I mean, they had, advertising agencies that would buy the ads in the UK, and you could pretty much sell your inventory that way throughout the year. And for us, it wasn't the case. Advertising agencies weren't interested at all in places like Mississippi for the most part. And if they were, it was only for a 2-week period leading up to Valentine's Day or Christmas or something like that.
So you've had to do a lot of direct calling on business owners, and the ad agencies weren't returning your calls.
That's right. And we ultimately figured out that we could sell, and that there was a lot more value to the car dealerships and the hospitals and local cell phone companies in those communities than there were to advertising agencies that were representing big national brands.
You started that in 97. How long did that go?
Yeah, I was there. Well, it lasted on into the 2000s, but
You're not going to say 4 years, are you?
no, I'm not going to say for it. I left the organization and basically sold my interest to my partners in 2002. So that was about 5 years that I was there, longest I'd ever done anything in my life at that point. So, but yeah, that was then. The company was growing, I think, and it ultimately sold to a large international company. Ironically, it was an Australian company that bought the company a few years after I left, and so that was a big exit at that time.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah, it was good. It was a great experience. I got a PhD in startups and all that was involved. Was a ton of pressure. I think for me, even just financially, how long you trying to get a sense for how long you stay at the blackjack table. Hoping for the timing to be right and for everything to line up. So it was a really great learning experience for me.
And what did you go do after that?
After that, I worked for a healthcare company in Nashville. Did business development for them for several years, and then at that point, between the mall advertising company and that, had really traveled so much, and my kids were getting of age where I felt like I needed to be home more and around more, and so at that point, I began another business, which was a business coaching business, working with new business owners. It really had some pieces of marketing to it, which is, sales and marketing has sort of run through most of what I've done in some way or another. So there were some of those, and some public relations that I did, work that I did in that too. So that was 6-7 years that I did that before launch.
What was the impetus to start Launch?
Well, so during that time, I had been, working with a lot of new business owners in a coaching capacity, and business coaching is different than consulting. It's sort of about who the expert in the room is. I mean, business coaching really recognizes that the expert is the business owner, and a good coach can kind of draw things out and pull things out. But it can be a very lonely experience. It can be you feel very isolated, I think, when you own a business, and there are a lot of things that you don't share with anybody, and so you need someone in your life a lot of times to work with. And so as I was doing that work, and we were really focused mostly on growth strategies for companies that I worked with and the owners that I was working with. But as we did that work, I began to realize more about what's involved in a startup and what's not just from the one that I was involved in, but, sort of the common threads that run through everybody's experience in that way. And so, I knew that business coaching, bouncing ideas off of someone, thinking through growth strategies together, all those things were really valuable. And having someone just to share everything with was valuable, for one. And I also began seeing that, I also led as CoLab started. I was a facilitator there for them. And so I began to realize that the folks that came to those classes, they were always full. They weren't marketed very widely because they didn't have to. They were full. If you knew about them, you could get in. And they were not very diverse. And so 2009, we had a student from Ethiopia that lived with us and our family for a year. And that experience really impacted, I think, everybody in our family, but me particularly, because it made me kind of rethink my view on poverty. And I had, even though I'd been involved in poverty in a lot of ways in our own country, I think I just had a lot of wrong ways I'd thought about it. And so when we had this student that was probably one of the hardest working young men I'd ever seen, he, was so conscientious and so diligent. And my kids were always trying to get him to drop his work and go out and have fun with them. And he didn't want to do that, wouldn't do that. And he knew he had an opportunity in front of him. And so he was committed and was stuck with it. So that made me rethink things. And when he left and went back to Ethiopia, I really began looking more at our community again. And I felt like that the lessons for me in that were that I needed to, there were places in our city I knew I had avoided learning about, going to, driving through. And I wanted to understand more of our broader context of our community and what some of the issues were. And so I just began looking a little harder and thinking a little more and honestly praying about really where I should be investing my time and at that point. So that was a great experience for me. But in the process of doing that, reconnected with my friend, Coach Lerone Jennings, who was at the Bethlehem Center at the time. He was the director there for, 16 or 17 years. And we began talking about possibilities to lead the class that I was leading at CoLab there. The other thing that was going on was that in some of the coaching work I'd done, I was working with a friend of mine who was Scott Salto, and Scott was asking some of the same questions I was, and we just began having some great dialogue around what was happening in Chattanooga and some of the needs here, and some of the things we were seeing around business particularly and startups particularly. But he learned about an organization in New Jersey called Rising Tide Capital. They were doing some great work with entrepreneurs, and he really helped make the connection with them. So we learned a lot from them. They were super encouraging. This is 2010, maybe 2000, just beginning of 2011. But in those conversations between Scott and I, and with Coach Jennings and I, we really, from there, I had the invitation to lead a class at the Bethlehem Center. So CoLab was on board with that at the time. It was kind of an experimental thing, but Coach Jennings rounded up 15 folks from the Alton Park community that had some interest, either a business idea or some interest in starting a business. And so we led the first class in, I think, April of 2011.
So the focus of launch, and I kind of discovered you guys when I moved into the BDC and reconnecting with Jeff. It really focuses on I don't want to say teaching, but teaching entrepreneurship to people who have good ideas who may not have the resources or the background that allows them to get started on their own.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there are a lot of different perspectives we could talk about this from, but one thing that I definitely learned is that, when you start a business, it for sure takes capital to start a business. You have to spend money in order to get a business off the ground and get it going. And so there are different ways you do that. Some people run up credit cards. Some people have family members that are more well off and that are willing to loan or invest some money. Some people go to, venture capital firms, funds, or maybe it's all of those in some form throughout the life of that company. But there's also, especially with small businesses, there's also the opportunity to bootstrap a business, meaning that you can grow it organically. If you can stay ahead of sales, you can keep your costs low, you can start selling, you can start small and really build and help fund your own growth. You can't do that with every business, but you can do that with some businesses, and especially small, very small businesses. And so I think that works really well for people that are under-resourced. And so a lot of Launch has been trying to figure out how we can help people that maybe don't have the resources to figure out a way to get there. Can they do it with sales? Can we help get them, a small loan or a grant in some cases, or a zero interest loan like with Kiva, where people can just get out of the gate and get going with their business. And if they could do that and not get themselves in trouble with debt, then they have a good shot.
We've talked to a lot of successful entrepreneurs on this podcast, and one of them I bring up quite often, Brian Elrod, who text requests and had educational outfitters, but he spent a lot of time in corporate America. And he said he didn't become an entrepreneur right away because he couldn't afford to be an entrepreneur. And I think there's a lot of truth to that there's a lot of people out there with good ideas who say, you know what, I really want to pursue this, but I can't afford to give up my job.
Right. I enjoyed that podcast. That was a good one. But the knowing when to sort of walk away from your day job is a big deal. And I think we treat that really carefully with people because we know it's a very personal decision. It's not something that, it's scary.
Yeah.
People have families, people have responsibilities, and they're trying to balance, when do I take the leap and how do I kind of do that as carefully as I can. And I think especially for people who don't have a lot of safety nets in their lives, that's a very scary thing to do. But, like I think about one entrepreneur who worked, with a large company here for 20 plus years and was having this issue. He had a successful food truck that he was doing on weekends, but was trying to figure out the right time because he was having growth, but was trying to figure out the right time to leave. And so, we talked a lot about that as he led up to that. And it was a scary thing, but he waited for the right time. He planned it really well. He executed it really well. he didn't take on, more than he could handle until he left. And then, when he did, he was able to jump right into some big opportunities. And it wasn't long before recollecting that he was, he said it was the best decision I've ever made.
Yeah.
He's been able to triple his income, some significant things that have happened, not to mention the freedom and the ability to work closely with family members and that kind of thing. And so it's, you see those kind of things. Obviously, that's not everyone's story, and sometimes it doesn't go as well as that, but it can.
Chattanooga's gotten to be an entrepreneur hotspot, and it gets a lot of recognition with a lot of things. And maybe this is my perception, but the entrepreneurs that Launch works with probably get the least attention.
Yeah, that's fair. I think when we first began, we, really the thought for me was, as Chattanooga, I just kept hearing more people talk about Chattanooga, politicians and government officials and business leaders. And, Chattanooga has such a rich story around entrepreneurship with some of the companies that are here and products that have come out of Chattanooga. But, there was all this talk about where we're headed in the future. And, it seemed to me that there was another opportunity to just become a more divided city, because it's sort of, if you have the resources to do it, then you can do it. And if you don't, you can't. And I think it's very frustrating for entrepreneurs to have an idea that's rolling around in their head for years sometimes and not know how to do anything with it, or where to begin or where to start. And so most of the time with people that we meet them there. They have this idea, they don't know where to begin with it. So we work with very early stage entrepreneurs and try to help them find the place to start and really think through their startup journey from beginning to end, plan it as well as they can, lay as good a foundation as they can. And so, that I think is super helpful. And they also get to do it in community with other people that are going through the same process.
Well, describe that process a little bit, pretty much who the typical person is coming to Launch and then what their journey is through it.
Well, so typically we would meet someone at the point where they take the class. That's sort of the door opener. And it's a good program for 10 weeks, one night a week. They meet with others for 3 hours and really think about everything from why they made this decision or had this business idea to begin with, where they can see themselves in it, where they feel like they might have weaknesses or gaps that they need to find other partners, whether that's a family member that'll help or an employee that they would have to hire, or, whatever. Think about goal setting and planning, think about marketing, all those kinds of things. And then ultimately, how to sort of present their business in a pitch style, presenting their business. So that's what they do in those 10 weeks. And then after that, we do a lot of business coaching with folks and helping them think through how they can specifically start if they haven't started yet.
So I look at it as kind of a overall economic model too for Chattanooga. We will be a more successful city if we can take those areas that have been neglected on a socioeconomic basis and bring a better economic situation to them, whether it's bringing in a business or going, much like I use the baseball analogy. You can go out and buy a team like the Yankees, or you can grow your farm system.
Yes.
And you're growing your farm system.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think we definitely feed the pipeline from early stage. And we work with, for us, we track the success of those businesses cumulatively. And so we have about an 85% survival rate, success rate for businesses that continue to operate. Since we started in 2011, about 85% of those are still operating. We have about 600 businesses that we helped start in that time, and about 85% of them are still operating.
That's a high success rate.
Yeah, it is. It is a high success rate. I think some of the reasons I think that it's high are that it shows, I think, the power of having a support team. We're a nonprofit, so we don't have to focus on, charging for every little thing that we do with individuals, thanks to investments that have been made by our community in the work that we do. But we're able to help businesses have a resource, a place to go to. We have great partners like, with organizations that we a lot of times steer people to those, the TSBDC and our CDFIs in the community, lending organizations, access to capital, something that everybody needs at some point. we tried just not to focus on that from day one, but really to focus on laying a foundation for the business from the beginning. And then we get to capital sooner or later, but that's an important part of what we do, and just finding other resources in the community because, we do a lot of things, but we don't do everything. And there are some great resources that are out there in the community.
And one of the things you brought up, and one of the things I always think of when someone has a business idea, a lot revolves around food and food trucks. And recently, dating back to the pandemic, you guys got heavy into the food business with the kitchen incubator. Can you talk about that a little?
Yes. Well, we realized at some point that the food businesses were our largest industry segment. And so we wanted to have something for them. We kept asking questions and conversationally and through surveys, but we just found out that a lot of the businesses that we were working with were having a hard time finding a place consistently to prepare their food. And even leading up to that, we had, not that we typically try to talk anybody out of any business idea, but we try to make sure that people ask good questions and ask their customers, their potential customers anyway, good questions, because that's where they're going to get their best answers. And so a lot of times I had people that would come with a restaurant concept. We knew restaurants fail at a high rate and they're expensive. And so they aren't necessarily the best model for someone to step right into if they're under-resourced. And so we tend to try to help people think about a catering business, a catering company. So we had a lot of people that we had sort of convinced to go down the catering business road.
Because the capital investment in a restaurant is just
much easier, much lighter. Yeah. And then, I think I always say, don't give up on the dream of a restaurant if that's what you want to do and where you want to go. Just make it step 3 instead of step 1, for your business. But anyway, we had a lot of folks that had done that. So when the pandemic hit, we had people that lost a lot of business just overnight. Events went away, catered events like weddings and things like that just all of a sudden stopped. And so, but we had already been looking at that group and realized there was a need for a place for them some solution for them to consistently be able to prepare their food for their events and that kind of thing. But the pandemic definitely brought out a huge need. So as we were looking at that, and this was probably in 2019 when we were really looking hard at it, we visited several other cities to see what they were doing around food and food incubation. And we learned a lot and came back with a vision for what we could do here in Chattanooga that where there really wasn't anything that we saw that was like what we'd seen in other places. So we came back with a plan to try to start something, a shared kitchen space, basically. And our friends at the TSBDC introduced us to some folks that owned what used to be Virginia College, and that was a culinary school that no longer operated, but it was full of their commercial kitchen equipment that they had in the space. And so it was an amazing, facility that had been kind of left sitting vacant for about a year and a half at that point. And so we, through some conversations with the owners of the building, we started looking at taking over that space.
And it came, as you said, filled with kitchen equipment, not just one kitchen, but you've got, 6 stations?
Yeah, 8 separate really workstations, plus a bakery kitchen, plus a cleanup area,
Has that caused your portion of the food industry to grow in terms of who launch participants are?
Yeah, the food sector continues to be the largest and has grown, I think, more so because of the kitchen incubator being open than others. But we definitely see more food businesses these days. I mean, it's a perpetuating thing. But that was in 2020, and when the pandemic hit, we thought we're gonna maybe have to put this on the back burner. But one of our funders locally asked if we would, consider seeing if we could get in the space. Urban Story Ventures made that possible and allowed us to move in the space without charging us any rent. We got funding to provide some meals for folks in the community as the food need got quite exacerbated from the pandemic. And so that's how we got in the building to begin with.
So you guys were making pandemic meals for seniors and others who couldn't get out and get anything and delivering them.
Yep. With the help of about 12 different community partners, we got those delivered. So we became kind of the hub for preparing those. We contracted with a lot of the food businesses that had lost business. So we were able to pay them, get some money in their pockets to help them get through this time. they made the meals, and then the community partners would come and pick them up and deliver them literally to the doors of seniors in the community. We worked with LaQuisha Ewing to help us really identify the need for, where the greatest needs were. And so I feel like we, developed a great list there. And so we, in the end, got, about 100,000 meals delivered out to the community to people that really needed them. And we were able to contract with folks that really needed the income at that time as well, and use the kitchen incubator sort of step one, first thing we did to facilitate all that.
That's really a pretty incredible story when you step back and think about it. Here we are in this world-changing pandemic, and you guys all come together and get not just those meals out, but establish the kitchen incubator, what it is today.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, it was an area we'd never worked in before, but it was a lot of fun to work in that space and to just, sort of shift gears for a minute and really think about where some of the greatest needs in our community were. So I'm very proud of that part of our work and the way that everyone on our team worked together. Through that, we met who's now Mark Holland, who's now our director of our kitchen incubator. He was involved in that whole process as well, and was with us then and a partner in that work. And so, but Mark leads the team at the kitchen incubator. We were able to, like in maybe 2021, start getting back to our original vision for that space as a shared kitchen space. And so now it holds about 35 businesses that are working in there every week, sharing that space. And some of those are catering businesses. A lot of those are food trucks. And then we also have some space for a business that's looking at developing a consumer packaged good. And so we have 5 separate spaces that they can use for that.
And these businesses graduate from there and go and get other spaces after they've established themselves.
Right. We've been since I was in 2020 that we first started. Yeah. We're still growing. We've done some renovation to the space. You
own the space now too.
And we own the space. That's right. And that's a great advantage, I think, for us and for the community, really, because of that. So we're in it for the long haul in the Brainerd area. We love the space and love the community out there.
What do you see the next 5 years for launch in the kitchen incubator? What's your vision?
I think that we are just scratching the surface of the need. I mean, this is in the food space. I think we've hit on something and addressed a need that was here. It's so fun to be creative and just, have partners in this work, and especially funding partners that allow us to be creative, and a board that allows us to be creative and just think about some of the solutions and some of the needs that are there. And so when it comes to launch and how we've done launch over the years and how it's still operating, our team is awesome. DeJuan Jordan co-leads launch with me now, and DeJuan has some great vision as well for launch. But I think with regard to the kitchen incubator specifically, that will continue to serve food entrepreneurs for many years to come and allow people to just get started on a good footing. And I think so many businesses get started on a bad footing, and they get, in over their heads, or they can't find what they need, or they never get a real shot because they can't have a foundation to help them start. And so a place like the kitchen incubator, everybody pays something to be there, but it's well below market rate, and they get an all-inclusive package and a place to really start their business from, Yeah. They can do everything they need from right there for a food business. So I think that's a huge advantage. I think also, hopefully, many of the food concepts, particularly ones that are novel and, new, that have a vision to start a restaurant, will come from that space. And so I think many of the future restaurants in our city will see come out of the work that we do there. And then I think, we want to continue, since we're reaching capacity already with that space. We want to keep thinking creatively about how to, how to grow that space. And so owning the building now, we have the advantage of being able to utilize the building as much as we can for that. I think looking at other spaces where there's satellite parts of our campus could be another possibility, another opportunity. And then also, lastly, I'd say just looking at, learning about how to do an incubator, thinking about other industry segments where maybe, there's also a need or also a gap in our community around other industry sectors where we might do, another type of incubator.
You got to feel like a proud papa when you see some of these businesses that started with you 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago and are still going.
Absolutely. I've always said, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I get to work with some amazing, people that are doing amazing work, and they have these incredible stories of things that they've done and things that they've overcome to do them. And so it's a very inspirational type of work that I get to do, from rubbing shoulders with them every day.
I would second that. When you stop and talk to some of the folks who are pursuing their dreams, just the backstories, they make great movies.
Absolutely.
Before I get to the last question, I do want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible, and it's a big thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do-good-here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I do have one last question for you. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Well, I would say probably take more risks. Don't be as fearful. Continue to step into opportunities. I probably would have, for me, we joked about my 4-year stint in places, and I think that what that meant for me and moving on. And I know these days a year is a long time to be at a place, but for me, I feel like I sowed a lot of seeds, didn't get to see necessarily a harvest of, the fruitfulness of the work that I had done. I didn't get to see the long-term results of it. Launch is the most rewarding work I think I've ever done. And so it took all of the different pieces of my story to really lead me to that work. And I'm so thankful for it and for the chance to be involved in it. So I'm not sure that it would be the right thing to say I would like to have gotten to that sooner or earlier, but it was something that I do think about.
Well, you needed all those pieces for it to happen the way it's happened at launch. That background's really what served you well.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that I've always struggled with the balance, or the, how you balance family life and work life, and have not succeeded at that in a lot of cases in my life. And so I would, I think, try to, make sure I was valuing and spending the time. Those places, there's so much give and take between the two, but I think, I hope the choices I made were good ones, but I think, spending more time, investing more time in my family, my wife, my kids, I know that pays dividends in the long run. And those are the folks that I want to live it out with, and they're going to be there when I'm old and grayer than I am now.
Well, that's a great point. I think Chattanooga's benefited from you, and we all have, but I know your family does, and they appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks, Mike. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.